Hey there everybody. Today I'm going to show you how to make kombucha at home, homemade. That's absolutely fantastic. A few months ago I looked up recipes and how-tos on kombucha. Actually it was more like a year ago. And in my opinion there were no good videos on how to do it. So I'm going to try to fill that niche and show you guys how I do it step by step. So join me for the ride. So my recipe calls for about 2 gallons of water. It's actually slightly under 2 gallons of water. What I'm going to mix with that are these blends of tea. So this is just a normal black tea in their family-sized tea bags. It takes 4 of those. I like adding the hibiscus. It gives it a nice floral note. And it gives it a beautiful pinkish red color to the finalized kombucha. And you'll be hearing a lot about turmeric in my in this recipe, but this is the tea that we are going to start out with. And then along with the 2 gallons of water, we're going to add a 1.5 cups of sugar when we make our tea. So I'm heating this water up. It doesn't take very long. I have a pretty fast boil setting on my stove, and I put all the tea that I showed you a minute ago into the 2 gallons of water. Right next to it here I have a 1.5 cups of sugar, and the water's pretty hot right now. It's hot enough to dissolve the sugar, and you don't want to really boil the tea. And if you look closely, you can see some tea actually floating around on the surface. I don't know what I did, but I must have busted one of the bags. It's not a problem, it's happened before, but it's no big deal. I just didn't want you to think I was dirty or anything. So I'm going to add the sugar right to the tea, the future kombucha. I'm going to use stainless steel utensils that are going to go in there. And I'm not going to bring this to a boil. I don't think it needs it, and it turns out weird sometimes if you bring it to a boil, and I can't really identify what happens. But anyway, it's hot enough now just to steep, and it's going to steep pretty much all day. And what I'm going to do is make this I'm going to come back to it later after it cools to room temperature, and that's key because you cannot add hot tea like this right to a SCOBY or you'll kill it. You'll kill the SCOBY. So what you want to do is bring it back down to room temperature, because the SCOBY remains at room temperature pretty much its entire life, or lives, however you want to look at it. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about variations on flavoring your SCOBY. I generally do just turmeric and ginger and some kind of fruit juice, and lately my choice has been pineapple. I don't get a lot of pineapple flavoring through it, but I do think it helps get it carbonated when you go to bottle your SCOBY. So I think it's important, but I don't think it's necessary. And we'll talk more about the bottling process later once the tea cools down and we go into the bottling session. But what I wanted to show you today was what I do with my flavoring. These cubes just came out of the freezer, and they're kind of weird looking. They look like something off the Muppets. These are blends of turmeric and ginger. What I started doing a few months ago was getting my juicer and buying huge handfuls of ginger and turmeric from the grocery store, fresh. And I just run them right through the juicer. And from the juicer, I stir them up real good, and I fill them into a ice cube tray, and I freeze them into these nice little ice cubes. And it took a couple of batches to figure out how much to add to it, but 1 ice cube per gallon, 2. Same thing with pineapple. So I'm going to let these sit out all day, let them melt down, get nice and liquidy, so that we can add them to the bottles later on. Now that's just one variation. Feel free, flavor it however you want. It doesn't make any difference to me. And it's going to take you some tinkering and figuring out, you know, how much of what. It took me a couple months to figure this out, but this is the recipe that I've been following. I wanted to show you something else. I have a friend who makes really good tea, homemade tea made from Yukon holly. It grows wild down here in South Carolina. And this is a mix of tea that she makes, and we have made kombucha with her blend of tea. All of the information's right there on the label. If you want to look into it, it's there. So it's just an added something that you can do, and it's fun to add these kind of things. So the world is your oyster. Try it out. So I just pulled this bottle out of my cooler, and you can see the real pretty color of kombucha that it is. You can see some sediment on the bottom. That's going to be mostly that turmeric and ginger and pineapple that was juice that was added to it for flavor. Nice fizz, right? This is absolutely delicious. I hope yours turns out as good as mine. All right, guys, I'm back. And it's been a whole day. And the turmeric, ginger, and pineapple is melted. And the tea that I made earlier is now cool. And it's time to get ready to bottle. So here's everything I have laid out on the counter. No need for the barbecue sauce. This is the tea. It's cooled down to the touch. You can see the tea bag still floating in there. I got all the bottles ready. Stainless steel funnel, probably a little overkill, but I bought some because we don't really have good funnels in my kitchen. So I bought stainless steel ones just for this job. And this is the kombucha from last week. And obviously I do them in gallon pickle jars. And you can see the SCOBY floating in at the top of each of those right now. This is where you should be at this point. So we're gonna start bottling. So if you're planning on flavoring your kombucha, like I do with the pineapple, ginger, and turmeric, it's gonna take you a little bit of time to figure out how many bottles you can make every week with how much you got and how much that has to be divided into each. This is 4 ice cubes, basically, of flavoring, 2 pineapple, and 2 cubes of a mix of ginger and turmeric. What I have found is that if I do 2 teaspoons per bottle, that works pretty good. So we're gonna go ahead and 2 teaspoons. Perfect. Okay. So the next thing I'm going to do, open these up. When you're fermenting your kombucha all week, you want to cover the top with something that will let air go through, but not let things like fruit flies get in or mold spores. I have lost a SCOBY to mold a few years ago, and a friend of mine had really bad fruit flies, and you can imagine what that looks like. So what I'm going to do here is okay. First thing I'm going to do is dig out the SCOBY from here. And I'm just going to put this in this little shallow bowl I have here because that SCOBY has doubled in size. Actually, it's probably more than doubled in size in the past week. And then I'm going to give it a good stir because a lot of the biological stuff that's growing in there that will become part of the SCOBY is resting on the bottom of this jar. And I want to mix that up so I get a nice even distribution through all of the bottles. Now, after I stir that up, I'm going to pour most of this in here. And the only reason why I transferred it to here is that it's just an easier pitcher to work with. If I had a stainless pitcher, it'd probably be nicer, or a glass pitcher. I just happen to have this real pretty ceramic pitcher that I like to use.
This last bottle probably got the least amount of the flavoring, but inside the funnel, there's still a good bit of flavoring. So I will start with the last bottle and work my way backwards so I can get most of that flavoring in that last bottle. Okay, all the bottles are full. They have the flavoring, and I have some kombucha left over. I have more bottles, but generally I make 10 bottles every week. That gives me one a day for every day of the week. That's 7, and I usually give 3 bottles away. I have a couple neighbors that like to drink them, a coworker that likes to drink them, and I just try to get rid of them and make sure they give me my bottles back. The rest of the kombucha is ready to drink. I pour it in this pitcher, and because I'm always only running a week, I'm out of kombucha right now, so I'll drink this for the next 2 days. It's not as carbonated as the bottles will be, but it will be cold and over ice. It's great. It's wonderful. When I say carbonated, after we seal these up and put them in the cupboard for a couple days, that's when they'll get to be that nice fizzy fermentation that you like. So I put that in the fridge. Now, it's just about sealing up the bottles. I usually like to wipe them down and clean up the bottles, and I'm going to put them in my cupboard. So this is what my cupboard looks like. There's 10 bottles of recently made kombucha. It will need to sit in there for approximately 48 hours. 48 hours is pretty much dead on the amount of time that you want to leave them alone. I usually leave them in the dark, so I shut the cupboard and I don't mess with them at all for that 48 hours. If you forget about them, like if I make them in the morning and I forget to take them out, and I take them out in the evening, they're going to be really carbonated. It's just a matter of a couple hours. At least that's what, in my experience, what has happened. So at about 48 hours, so right now it is the evening on a Saturday. So Monday evening, I will pull these out of the cupboard and I will put them in my refrigerator. And then that will stop the biological process of actually producing carbon dioxide. But this is pretty much a finished bottle. It just needs a couple days to sit. So a couple things I just wanted to clarify. I touched on this earlier. This mesh is some scraps of a mesh that we use at my work, and it's called Nitex. It's a nylon, super fine scientific mesh. It's 40 microns and are the little squares, and if you look at them through a microscope, 500 microns is a half a millimeter. These are 40. This is overkill. I just happened to have some that wasn't going to be used, so I took some, and that's what I used for my fermentation jars. I think that it would be fine to use a piece of cloth. These are the napkins my wife has sewed, so we have napkins at the dinner table, and we have all sorts of old pieces of material that we use, but I think you could just use this. I don't think it's a big deal. What I have used in the past was this, and all I would do is kick the jar sideways so it could breathe, because it's going to create carbonation, and what you want to do is you don't want it to blow up. You need it to breathe a little bit. So I just kicked it off to the side, but that's when I got mold. So that's a big access for mold to get in there. Something like this is probably some of the better mold deterrents, but something like this is probably completely usable. And what I do is I just put it right over the lid of the jar and just rubber band it down. Just rubber band it right over the lid of the jar. So that works for me. Now, what about all this SCOBY that we've got here? Oh, dripping it out. So that SCOBY, I usually cut it down. That's a lot of SCOBY. If you cut it down to a similar size every time, you are going to be able to basically make the same kombucha every time. If I threw that SCOBY back in there next week, that's twice the amount of SCOBY, somewhere around there, than what I started that last batch with. So it's going to turn out a little different. And I don't like that. I've got a recipe that I've been sticking with. So I'm going to grab a pair of kitchen shears, and notice I don't touch my SCOBY. In fact, I'm going to use kitchen shears. I'll just set it right here on top of this. Hopefully this doesn't mess up. And I'm going to cut this SCOBY in half. And I'm going to take that half a SCOBY and I'm going to put it in one of these jars. I'm going to take the other half of that SCOBY and I'm going to put it in this jar. All that extra SCOBY, you have a whole SCOBY and then some. All that extra SCOBY can be thrown away in the trash. Best part about it, though, is if you get somebody hooked on your kombucha, just give them some SCOBY, and they can work it out too. And show them this video. Okay, so we've moved everything into these jars. What I like to do next is put the jars in the sink. Okay, so here's the tea, and we're getting ready to add it to the jars with the SCOBY in it. If you remember earlier, I think I ripped one of the tea bags because there was loose tea floating around. I think there's still some specks of it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to filter it all through this sieve here. So we're just going to rest the sieve right in there as we pour it in. But you got to get the tea bags out. And so what you do is you get the tea bags out. You can use a slotted spoon or however you get the tea bags out and just get rid of it. So that's it. Pretty simple, huh? I hope you all enjoyed the video and pass it along to your friends. It seems like a daunting task, but it's really not that difficult, especially if you do a little bit of planning. And if you have any comments, post them below. If you have any questions, post them. I'll do my best to answer them. I'm a rookie at this. I just found a recipe that I like and I figured I'd share it with the world.